Okay, so I think we'll make a start. Good afternoon, everyone who's joined. Welcome to our Nested Insight webinar on our research published today about can responsible investment communications engage pension members more effectively than standard approaches. And I'm Will Sandbrook, I'm the Managing Director of Nested Insight. I'm really delighted to be chairing this panel today. I'm joined slightly confusingly across the desk from me, but also on a separate screen by my colleague Joe Phillips, who led the research. By Stuart Murphy, who is the head of TC Client Management, Legal and General Investment Management, who are our partners and funders for this work, and so we're very grateful for their support. And by Helen Kate Hardy, who is a content strategist at Tumello, who are a platform helping create greater transparency and engagement for investors over how their money is invested. And by Jeff Tukey, who is the head of pensions and risk benefits at Virgin Media O2. So should we kick off with a couple of bits of housekeeping? First, as ever, I think we're all increasingly used to doing these events online and as webinars these days, but that doesn't mean that nothing can go wrong. So if there are any technological glitches, please just bear with us during the session. We'll do our best to get things back up and running as quickly as possible. Hopefully there won't be, but please just bear with us if there are. Secondly, everyone apart from our panelists is muted. But we do absolutely want the session to be interactive and to hear from you through the session, including in particular with any questions that you want to put to the panel. You can do that through the Q&A box that should be there on the webinar platform. Those come through to me and I'll pass them out to the panelists. We'll get to as many of those as we possibly can. Just one thing to note, the screen is currently showing a number of equally sized boxes, some of which are people and one of which is a slide. If you click on along with the slides in, then that will change the layout so that you can see more of the content on the slides, and the rest of us will become a bit smaller, which I'm sure will be a benefit for you. And then finally, please also do just share and talk about the event on social media using the hashtag pension engagement. We'd love to hear your thoughts on social media if you can share the event as it goes on. Okay, so let's move on to the session proper. So in the last few years, there's been a real explosion of interest in responsible investment issues, but particularly, but not limited to, issues around climate change. On the asset owner side, that's led to a push towards integrating responsible investment objectives into portfolios. And on the end investor side, there's a growing recognition of the impact that people's investments can have, and that's led to some degree to increased investor engagement and more demand for action back on the asset owner side. And of course, the role of investment in the financial system was a big focus in COP26 earlier this month, so there's a lot in the national media around that as well. Some of this increased focus has led to a degree of optimism in the pension sector and investment sector that this consumer interest in responsible investment issues might be leverageable to generate increased engagement by people with their pension savings. Engagement on responsible investment issues, but also engagement more generally. And some have suggested, in fact, that engaging people through these issues could perhaps go as far as even people making higher contributions to their pension savings as well. So we really wanted to test that and explore some of those ideas and some of those hypotheses in the real world. And that's what we've done in the research that we published today. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Joe to talk us through the headline findings of that research. And then each of our panelists is going to just share some thoughts, both on the research and on these issues more broadly. After that, we'll move on to questions from me and from the audience as they come in. So really looking forward to the discussion. I think it's a great topic. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Joe.
Thanks very much, Will. So last year we asked people in a survey what they thought about different ways of presenting information about responsible investment and environmental, social and governance or ESG issues in the context of pensions. And we also asked them how they might respond to a variety of types of messages. In that research, we were starting to try to understand whether these themes and stories can boost members' engagement in their pension. And we got some quite mixed responses from different groups in our survey research. You know, there were some promising signs and there was also a sense that perhaps this wouldn't work for everybody. So this year we decided to test it out in practice in the real world. Today I'm going to share the results of a trial we conducted this summer. And the purpose of the trial was to help us answer these questions. So are messages highlighting responsible investment approaches and impact any more effective at driving engagement than other more generic messages? And if so, how can those messages be most effectively framed and communicated? And thirdly, do the answers to those first two questions change at all if we look at different demographic groups, if we look at gender or age or industry or kind of any other factor? So the way that we did this, and bear with me because I'm going to explain a bit what we did so that the findings make sense. The way we did this was to run a randomised trial of different emails with some of the least engaged pension savers we can find. So people who are actively contributing to their pension, but who have never logged into their accounts. The money's going in, but they've never signed in themselves. And we drew this trial population from the NEST membership. So NEST refers to them as unregistered members, and NEST regularly runs activation campaigns to encourage them to log in for the first time. So we took around 35,000 unregistered contributing members, and they were randomised into one of 5 groups. You can see that the 5 groups in the bubble circles on the slide here. So we had a control group, and then we had 4 treatment arms. Each of those treatment groups received a different email in May with a follow-up reminder a week later, and the control group didn't receive any email in that trial period. And then everybody in all of the groups received an invitation to complete a follow-up survey. The 4 emails that we sent vary slightly from each other in terms of both the subject line and the content, but all the other email content and presentation was exactly the same, including the visuals, so that any differences that we observed over the control and treatments could be attributed to the messages we were interested in testing. The call to action in all of the emails was to log into your account. And the 4 different emails that we tested were firstly a savings email. So this is the usual activation email that NEST sends out, which refers to the money that's held in the pension as savings. The second email was we referred to as the investment email, where we talked about the money in the pension being invested in things like shares and properties to help it grow over the long term. And we included that because we wanted to be able to understand and whether it was something about talking about investment rather than responsible investment that was driving any difference we saw. And then we had 2 different emails that included information, the first of which had sort of quite a general message, and the second of which included that same content, but also gave specific examples of how NEST encourages companies to act sustainably. So it included the language, for example, by tackling climate change, building affordable housing, and treating workers fairly. 4 weeks after that first email was sent, we measured 3 different outcomes: whether the emails were opened, whether people clicked through to the NEST website, and whether they actually logged in and registered their account for the first time. And we looked at how those outcomes varied between the control group and the treatment groups, and we also looked for differences in different demographic groups, and also according to some sort of more attitudinal questions that we asked in the follow-up survey. So in the charts I'll share, and also in the full report that you can read from our website, anything relating to the savings email is in the pink colour, the investment email is in the blue, and we use a dark purple for the more general responsible investment message, and a lighter purple for the specific responsible investment email, the one that included the examples. So what did we see in the results? I think a lot of people in our industry, as Will said at the start, might have expected that the responsible investment emails would perform better at engaging people with their pension. In recent months and years, a lot of hopes have been pinned on this idea of engaging people through talking about responsible investments. But we actually found that although all the emails increased account registrations relative to the control group's rate, the basic savings email actually had the strongest impact on member registrations, and you can see that in the larger chart on this page. You can see in the second smaller chart on this page that this was driven by the higher open rates for that email, and particularly the click-through rates from the savings email. So that your pension savings for the long-term subject line had the highest open rates, and that email also had much higher click-through rates. We hypothesised that we might see differences in age or gender, particularly based on some of the assumptions that are made about younger people or women, perhaps caring more about ESG issues. But in fact, we didn't see any statistically significant variation. So the results on this slide and these charts hold true regardless of age or gender or salary or employment industry. However, although we didn't see any demographic differences in the responses, We, as I said, also looked at whether there were attitudinal differences in responses, and here we did find something different. We saw a different pattern. So in our survey, we asked people several questions to try and understand their attitudes around ESG issues and how much they cared about these sort of issues. And we gave them some specific examples as well as talking about the kind of general ideas. And we used these to give everybody who participated in the survey an engagement score. So we classed them as higher ESG engagement if they were in the upper quartile of responses, and lower ESG engagement if they were in the lower quartile. And so on this slide, the down arrows show those who were in the lower ESG engagement, and the up arrows show those who were in the higher ESG engagement groups. So when we looked at the group who said they were least engaged in ESG issues, that pattern we saw at the kind of total population level holds true. The savings email is still the most effective at driving email click-through rates. However, when we looked at those who said they were most engaged in ESG issues, we saw a different pattern. The general responsible investment email was more effective at driving email click-through rates, conditioning on email opening relative to the investment email among those who said they were most engaged in ESG issues. So for those who care about ESG issues, talking about how their money is responsibly invested, perhaps without giving specific examples, was found to be more engaging than the other approaches used in the investment and the savings emails. Although the responsible investment emails didn't boost engagement as measured by registration rates as effectively as the standard savings email, we did see that people who had opened the specific responsible investment email, the one with the examples, were more likely than any other group to say that they had high trust in their pension provider when we asked them in that follow-up survey. People who opened this email also displayed higher confidence in their knowledge around pensions than other groups. So they were more likely to say they definitely or roughly knew the size of their pension pot. They were more likely to say they knew how much they would have saved by the time I retire. I think it's quite difficult to explain this finding, but perhaps offering examples of how someone's pension pot is invested could make them pay more attention to the information they can read about their pension after they've logged into their account for the first time. Perhaps giving specific examples does build trust in a way that the other emails didn't. Through the follow-up survey, we were able to explore whether there are any differences in the knowledge that people reported about key aspects of their pension saving between those who had registered and logged into their account for their first time when compared with those who didn't register. And this included looking at whether they knew their contribution amounts, how much money is in their pension. And we did see significant differences in self-reported knowledge when we compared the group that had registered with the unregistered group, as shown in the table here. And I'm sharing this finding because although there are no differences between the treatment groups, this doesn't vary depending on which email people got. I think it's important to note that that first account registration can be the first step in an engagement journey and can be a door opener to other types of engagement and confidence and knowledge. And every activation campaign is an opportunity to get as many unregistered members as possible to take that first step towards engaging with their pension, which can lead to that growing confidence and knowledge and possibly further action. And I think this demonstrates the importance of choosing the most effective message for the engagement goal, and when that's an unengaged group of people, thinking about, you know, what's the most effective way to get them to take that first step on their engagement journey. So to sum up, we think the findings from this trial suggest that if that engagement goal is first-time engagement, if we're trying to reach a disengaged group, that keeping the message quite simple and very focused on the call to action is likely to be more effective, and actually sort of the potential of overcomplicating the message or bringing sort of too much into that first contact could have an opportunity cost. However, we're really not saying as a result of this trial that responsible investment messages and stories don't have a role to play. And I think it's really important we saw that amongst people who care about ESG issues, they could be more effective at driving engagement. So if we can identify populations for who that's true, we might make different choices. We also saw that in our earlier research that talking about responsible investment and giving the kinds of examples of how money is invested can help with building awareness that the pension savings are invested, and can help with that sort of part of knowledge and engagement that sometimes people need to understand. And then finally, you know, we saw indications in this trial that if the objective for the communication is to build trust or to build knowledge, that actually a responsible investment might have a role to play. So I think there was some surprises in the findings. I think there is further learning to do, but we're really excited to have taken the theory and what we see in surveys into the real world and see how it works in practice.
Great, thank you, Jo. I understand we're having some issues with the sound quality, so I hope people were able to hear most of what Jo said there. I'm now going to hand over to Stuart for some comments in response. Stuart.
Well, hopefully the sound's okay from my end. So I suppose to start off, I suppose, just in terms of the reason that we were so keen to support this research and work with the NEST team. We over the last few years have done an annual survey looking at different generational thoughts around ESG and the impacts of it. And one of the sort of key stats that came from it, and certainly in the most recent survey we ran, was that 83% of members said they would be more engaged if they felt their pension was having an impact. So we have the theory there that responsible investing could be, if you like, a silver bullet, a way to drive that engagement. And this research was sort of a perfect example of a way to draw that out. And I do think the findings are really interesting. I'll call out some of my thoughts around you know, how in particular that plays out. I think Jo touched on a really important point there in terms of the slide that's still on actually, but the wrap up point around that awareness. I think from the work that we've done working with Tamello, and don't worry Helen, I'm not going to steal any of your thunder here hopefully, but one of the key bits of sort of member feedback we get is how few members actually understand that the pension contributions they make are actually invested in real companies. So they may well care about ESG, they you know, clearly care about the planet, pay, diversity, but they don't necessarily associate that with their pension. So I think part of this building of the build out of the awareness in using responsible investing, I think we've got a long way to go to sort of start drawing that through. The bit that I loved from the research personally was the 66% of members that had the responsible investing specific email that said that they trusted their pension provider. For me, that trust equals value in the pension they've got, that equals engagement, and that equals, you would like to think, sort of increased contributions and buy-in into it. And one of the other stats that we've seen going up within the ESG research that we do is members, you know, the percentage of members saying that they would contribute more to their pension if they felt it was having a sort of a positive impact. And that went up to 24% in the last year. It was a 50% jump in members that said they would potentially pay more in if they felt it was making a difference. So so I think, you know, we need to hang in there, I suppose, in terms of how we use it. Surprises undoubtedly were the levels of sort of registrations, I suppose, in terms of like sort of typically 4 or 5% depending on the different email types. And I think my take on that would possibly be the fact that there is this generic messaging side of things, and I think personalization is going to be key to this. It's focusing on things that really resonate with members, isn't it? And you know, an example of that would be our video pension benefit statements we've been running for a couple of years, where we personalise, they're specifically sent to members with the details of their pension, you know, talking to them in terms of their name, how much they're going to get in retirement, those types of things. And the engagement rates we get from that are brilliant. I mean, typically 50% click-through rates on emails. You know, a recent campaign we ran, we got a click-through rate of 43% of members click through. 97% of them watch the video, and unbelievably 77% actually click through on the call to action to review the pension. So it's a personalization work there, and I think we can extend that out into responsible investing. Again, some of the ESG research we did said that sort of Gen X and in particular, it was Gen X and boomers would potentially disinvest if on issues around sort of poor pay and governance. So if you could target your messaging specifically on to cohorts where that matters and that they care about it, I think you're going to get the sort of the more of a buy-in and more of engagement with it. So I think key to this as we take it forward, it is personalisation, undoubtedly. But I would echo the findings and Joe's point earlier that we shouldn't ignore the simple messaging either. If we want to get the unengaged, if you like, on board, we mustn't lose sight of that simple messaging. We need to hook them in, and then once we've hooked them in, we can then look at that personalisation and specific messages. So I suppose the 3 points for me was, it was quite disappointing we didn't see the numbers be higher for the responsible investing, followed on by the fact that it was really hard to see the value that came from that for members, that ESG was important, and that 66% was great. And then if we can just bring in that personalisation point, we can use that to drive up the value, I think, as we go forward. So I think there's some valuable lessons around your type of messaging that gets out there and how you use it and how you build on it.
I think a bit more about, should we be optimistic or disappointed by what we've seen in this research, kind of in some of the questions afterwards. But before we get there, Helen, perhaps I can pass over to you.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And Stuart, don't worry, you haven't stolen any of my thunder. It's complementing quite a lot what I'm going to say, which is great. As mentioned, I'm from Temello, and we are in the business of showing investors what companies they're invested in, really trying to bring that to life and enabling them to vote on issues they care about through the platform, showcasing AGMs which come up in the companies that they're invested in, and giving them equal sides of those stories and helping them to vote and tell their fund manager what they think. So I would like to focus today a little bit on the emails that we send out, because that's our kind of primary way of engaging people and reminding people to come to the platform. And obviously this is where we really talk about ESG issues a great deal. So just to share some learnings, one of the first thing that we have really learned is not to alienate people from the start. We've discovered that even using the term ESG is a no-go for us. That will immediately turn people away from their screens. Even so, using the word environment, still too broad. As Stuart said, people are really looking for a much more personalized experience. I mean, I would say, just to make the assumption, we have made assumptions that if you care about the environment, say, that doesn't necessarily mean that you care about all facets of the environment. You might care particularly about plastic waste and not so fast about carbon emissions. So we have learned that we can't make these generalizations that everyone's going to care about everything in the same sort of levels. I guess a good analogy would be everyone loves a Disney film, but before you say let's go watch Disney, everyone's not going to sit down until you've told them, well, is it going to be one with Beauty and the Beast, or is it going to be one with a lamp and a flying carpet? Like, you need to work so much harder from the outset to get people to sit down and engage and take action. So that's what we've sort of focused on at Temello, is to really focus on the detail and try to sort of explain the concept up front. One good example, or one sort of analogy I would put forward, is on the environment example. So last year during AGM season, there was a collection of shareholder proposals from some big names, some big name banks and airlines. They were climate focused. They were focusing on whether they should align with the Paris Agreement goals, and also cutting investment in fossil fuel companies. We saw these as really big hitter votes that people would be really, really engaged with. So we put these 4 votes together on an email with some simple icons and a synopsis of what each vote was about. Kept it really simple, sent it out, thought it would drive loads of engagement. And while it did engage, it wasn't as much as we thought. So in analysis, we wondered why was this? And one of the things that we took away was there was too much choice. So again, back to the movie theme, I'm sure we've all been there, where we've all tried to decide as a family what to decide on Netflix. No one makes a decision, there's too much choice, and we all kind of walk away. That was a similar sort of gist to this sort of email. Again, the language was too complex. We didn't work hard enough to explain what the Paris Climate Agreement was. We used the word ESG and emission targets, scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. Immediately, that was probably a bit too scary for some people to actually really want to engage with. But in contrast, we recently released an email about a relatively lesser known Australian mining company, and the vote was, and we really tried to tell the story about what the shareholder proposal was about. It was about asking that the company no longer just cease all fracking until the government had put in some regulations about protecting certain landmarks. Earlier in the year, a very sacred landmark had been blown up by a rival mining company. And so what we did was we just simply told that story, and we saw a huge boost in engagement, because ultimately, you know, as Stuart and Joe mentioned, this was a sort of a human interest story. It was tangible. So the learning from that was ultimately that the storytelling will always prevail. Another learning that we've had is timing is everything. It's no surprise that over the past year, with the world focused on COVID, people have been really focused on health. That's what people are really wanting to engage with. So votes that have gone out on, or emails or engagement that has gone out to talk about what the AstraZeneca CEO should be paid, or whether Coca-Cola should report on whether their sugary goods are going to impact public health, McDonald's, the use of antibiotics in its supply chain. These are all votes that have really got people off their seats and wanting to engage, because the media is reporting about health. That's what they're thinking about. So it's a real kind of, I guess, with any engagement strategy, speaking to giving the right information to the right user or person at the right time is kind of the Everest. So in situations like that, that's where we really see a boost of engagement. And you can say the same for the COP26, which we've just seen. We released a climate vote. Again, a not particularly very well known company, but it was talking about emissions at exactly the same time as COP26, and we obviously saw engagement soaring. And one other thing that we talk about quite a lot at Temello is also timing, not of the day, but within the day that you send something out. We find it quite interesting, that interplay between how someone feels about their pension and how someone feels about ESG, and it's very personal. In one respect, ESG is very personal. It's connected to your values and your feelings about, you know, all of these issues, but then your pension feels sometimes connected to your work, and you don't really know when you're supposed to be interacting with it. So we often have to think very carefully about when we send an email out, whether it'll be something someone wants to do while lying on the sofa or on their phone, or whether they want to do that at work. And that's something we still haven't quite cracked, but we're working on it. I appreciate I'm probably running out of time, but just the one final point was humour works. It's not something that you usually associate with ESG, and that's not to say that any of these issues are a laughing matter, but keeping it light does often really work. It's not something people expect. We're known to inject sort of a really terrible pun or a play on words or a catchphrase that helps to engage people, and I think people are really happy to be part of a journey, be part of a joke, and be an inclusive sort of club. So we've also found that that's been really effective at the right time and place. So just to summarise, a few things that we keep at front of mind when we're creating ESG themed content is to make sure we're not alienating people from the start, make sure we're not pigeonholing them in any way, tell the story, consider the timing and the current affairs that surround it, and have some fun with it. And that's me, thank you.
Great comments, thank you, Helen. And then just finally, going to hand over to Jeff.
So hi everyone, so I'm Jeff Tukey, I'm Head of Pensions now for Virgin Media O2, but what I'm going to focus on is probably the O2 journey for the last few years, because that's who I joined sort of 3 years ago, and it's only recently that we've become Virgin Media O2. So I joined an organisation that had its own trust DC scheme, and I think it's probably fair to say that governance was taking up an increasing amount of time and focus and energy. And with the resources that we had between the employer and the trustees, it probably meant that comms was left slightly behind. And so I think we made a decision as a business to move to a master trust, which we did last year in 2020. And then some of the key reasons are things that we're sort of talking about today. So it was around comms and engagement and giving people a full range of support, but also it enabled us to move our default on the DC side into an ESG focused fund, and that, you know, broadly speaking, is £500 million that is doing better, which is the right thing to do for the business, and it's the right thing to do by our people. In terms of comms, what has worked well in the past year I think I'm probably just repeating things that people have said, but it in the real world it'd be face to face, but in the last year it's been webinars, and having the ability for employees to actually hear things face to face, or sorry, video to video in simple language that is explained, because actually over a webinar you can explain something, I think, very differently to how you would write it in pension language, because let's face it, pension language is often gone through compliance teams and is not really consumer friendly. But equally, Stuart touched on it, we piloted or ran our first video statements, and for disclosure, LGIM are our master trust supplier, and we run those just a couple of months ago, and the feedback was fantastic. I got feedback from random people in the organisation who just told me how amazing and how easy to understand it was compared to the usual pack that they get through the post. So that has really helped, and I think Stuart touched on some of the sort of metrics that has delivered. But I think when it comes to kind of ESG, we have a Better for the Planet group within Virgin Media, and that is a group that is focused on predominantly climate change, but they also touch on the social and the governance issues. We ran an ESG session with them, and it was really, really well attended. It was really well engaged. It was really good, and got lots of interest out of it. But it was for a minority of our population. There is kind of somewhere between 5 and 10% of our population within this group, and therefore I think if I consider that in the context of this research, that's possibly why the ESG messages doesn't necessarily move the dial, because it's not for everyone. But I do believe that it definitely has a part to play in kind of pushing the comms agenda on. I think for me, simplicity is the key thing. The video statements, the face-to-face or the webinars is a way to try and explain things and make it simple and get people to answer their questions. I think as a business, what does the research show us? I think it kind of shows me that I've got to use this network to kind of engage a core group of my people, but actually it's not going to be the silver bullet. And actually what we need is a package of communications, a package of channels that perhaps means that people can get what they need. And I think one of the things that sort of we're keen to explore is sort of further personalization. So the video statements, but equally we're talking to our pension provider about things like personal guidance for people who are coming up closer to retirement. How can they get the help they need to understand what are my options, annuity, drawdown, that kind of stuff. I think at the younger end as well, probably for all people, what we're going to do in the next few years is explore wider savings options. So that will be, rather than having something that's called a pension plan that perhaps turns people off, we'll have a savings plan. With pension will be a core part of that to meet our auto enrolment requirements. But actually offering things alongside pension, providing you've met your auto enrolment, you could then put money into an ISA or a lifetime ISA, or perhaps you need some money to pay off debt. I think it would make it much more relevant for people, and actually it removes that kind of barrier where younger employees just say, well, hang on a minute, I'm 30, 40 years away from my retirement, I can't picture that, I'm not interested in pension. So hopefully if they have some investment goals within the same bucket that are much more short-term focused, it will then actually have a positive impact on their pension. I've tried to be really quick, Will, so that you can start the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Jack, and thank you all for some really great comments. So we've already got a couple of questions in from the audience, but please everyone do add in further questions if you have them. And in the meantime, I'm going to kick off with a couple of my own. I guess, Stuart, you said we kind of all hope this might be a silver bullet, and to some extent, I think this research says, well, it's at least in this form not a silver bullet, but there's still in the comments people have made a lot of optimism about what can be done through the lens of responsible investment to drive greater engagement. So I guess interested in each of your views. I'll go around in turn on kind of, should we remain optimistic that even for those who are kind of disengaged, this is a way in, or is it more a way of taking a subset of people who are already engaged and interested in these issues and sort of bringing them further in? Could this be the thing that gets the sort of really disengaged people more engaged if we do it differently, or does this research and others lead us down a more kind of targeted route? So maybe Stuart, you want to kick off on that one?
Yeah, happy to. Quite a lot in that question. I'll try and pick up the various bits. I think it certainly, in isolation, it isn't going to be the silver bullet, is it? The research is really clear on that. I think I would go back to I think the biggest gap we have here still is that point that huge swathes of the membership across the pension landscape in the UK don't understand that with the greatest respect in the world, don't understand that their money that they pay into the pension every month actually invests in real companies, and that their money can make a real difference in terms of how it's invested. So I think that there's a big piece of work around that to actually bring that to life. I think is to be able to to bring that realization together. And then from the work we've done with Tumelo, and we've had over 17,500 votes cast now from members across different resolutions, which is pretty high, albeit with that engaged population. But the most time that members spend when they first register, as an LGIM member I'm talking about here, that goes into the Tumelo site, the most time is spent on the pages that actually lists out where the companies they're invested in. So where the money actually goes, how it's split, and then once you've got that, you hook them, and that's when they get engaged with the votes, they get the community bit going, and everything. But that's the bit that's the real sort of eye opener. And I think the generic responsible investing email, if you've not done that first bit, is always going to be a struggle, I think, unless somebody's really engaged in ESG anyway up to that point. But then we do have to then think about we've really got to bring to life. But once we've done that, and when members are really interested, I do think it is a game changer. More members understand that their money is making a difference. The Make My Money Matter campaign type of approach. The most important thing is that members value what they've got. They trust their provider. They trust their employer to put the scheme with the right provider. And by getting that trust and engagement, they will then engage. They will review contributions. We know from the feedback on Tumelo tool, it's right. Where do I click through to pay more in? Now I understand it. The evidence is there that members will do it. So I think we've got a great opportunity with the ESG engaged population, but we shouldn't completely rule out the population that don't yet understand the link between the fact that that's where their pension monies go, and that's why it can make, their money can make a real difference in terms of where it's invested. And keep going back to the point, and Jeff touched on it, the personalisation of it. The more we can make this personal and relevant to the members, the better, I think. And lots of other industries are able to do much more of that personalised nudging, personalised messaging, in retail sector. But until we get the hoped for change to sort of the pensions landscape from the advice perspective that allows some personalised guidance, and we're always going to be behind maybe some other industries that can be a lot more personal in their messaging. I'm sure in Jeff's world, you're able to do far more personalised sort of messaging into your customer base than we're able to do in pensions land. So we do need that change in legislation as well to help this. So I gave just as long an answer as the question was, I think. Hopefully that's okay.
Thanks, Joe. And yeah, there are some other questions coming in. So just any quick additional comments on that topic, Helen, and then Jeff.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm really optimistic, because I think that we've only really sort of scratched the surface on growing this kind of population of ESG sort of savvy investors and people who want to engage. I think that E of ESG has been something the whole industry is focused on, the environmental aspects, and we've got the social and the governance side, this whole kind of massive piece that we can focus on. I think Jeff mentioned that there was a specific internal group in the company that talked about climate issues, but people who want to talk about social and governance ones, they need a home as well. And I think that we could help to create that infrastructure for people to be having those conversations and to have that kind of community. This year, it was a record number of social justice proposals across AGM season. There's clearly an appetite for people to be talking about things that aren't just the environment, and I think that's an area that we could focus on. I'll pass on.
And Jeff, anything to add?
I'll just echo what Helen and Stuart have said there. I mean, from a business perspective, actually, you know, I've sort of talked about the E, but actually there is an increasing focus around, you know, wider governance as well, and you know, you do see that bit on the page. I think it's probably because, you know, with COP26 recently, the climate has really kind of, you know, been at the forefront of everyone's minds and attention, which probably means the S and the G are probably feeling like sort of slightly poorer relatives of E at the minute. But you know, I think you know,
yeah, great, thank you, Jeff.
Sorry, Will, just on that point, it's probably worth saying, just to sort of bring that to life in terms of the S and the G. I mentioned the 17,500 votes that we've had. The most popular or the most votes we've seen are members voting on executive pay. Climate does come up there, but also animal welfare does as well. But the #1 vote is around executive pay. So, you know, it isn't just about, if we just, as Jeff said, if we focus on the environment, we're missing a real opportunity here. And then that comes back to that focused messaging again. I think it's getting the right message to the right cohorts.
Great, thank you, Stuart. Joe, I'm not going to pass that question on to you because we've got too many other questions coming in. The first one, which I'll start with you on. So we've had a couple of questions about differences in age cohorts and how they respond to this stuff. So partly just as only more we can say about any differences we saw in age, but also to the extent that we didn't see much difference, are we surprised by that? And then just when you think about an answer, I'll then maybe hand over to other panelists just to talk a bit more about what you've seen in your own experience about differences in different age groups. I guess the motivating thought behind a lot of this being all the environment, that's a kind of millennials thing, isn't it? So yeah, Joe, on the research we did, kind of any more comments on the age distinctions?
Not really. We looked really hard and we kept looking because I think, like many in the industry, we started out at least to test the hypothesis that younger people care about this stuff more, younger people are more likely to act, and we just didn't see that. We didn't see any differences by age in the way that people responded to the emails. We also sort of saw something similar last year when we asked people in surveys. But I think just one point I'd like to make about the nature of this research is that certain people turn up in surveys. We don't see the whole world when we do a survey. In a trial like this, we saw the behaviour of everybody. You know, we didn't ask them to respond to a survey. We just sent out emails and saw how they responded to that. So I think there is a danger, or at least a need to think carefully about the way that we as an industry are interpreting the world through what people say they will do in surveys. That intention gap between what people say and what they actually do in real life, I think is one of the things that we've seen in this research.
Which is actually interesting. Another question, another observation we've had in the comments, that there's a real difference between what people say they'll do and what they actually do, and it's definitely something that kind of comes through in this work. So Helen, on the age point, and you've talked a bit about different groups sort of maybe being interested in different issues. What do you find? Do you have data that breaks down levels of engagement by different age groups, and what do you see in that data?
We do see breakdowns of different age groups, but like Joe, we have not seen any trends that are particularly, you know, that we could really pick out as having age groups or sections of people that are particularly interested in certain areas. We do just see really different behaviour across the board. So yeah, I'd be lying if I saw some specific demographic trends to report.
So I think we're saying the whole this is all about targeting millennials thing might be a bit of a myth, which is probably good to know. Okay, we're going to move on rather than having everyone answer all the questions, just to make sure we get to a couple of different ones. So one of the questions we've had is, does the industry need a single format to calculate or demonstrate the kind of ESG values of a fund as a basic way of helping people to measure between funds and companies? So maybe Stuart, start with you on that one.
Oh, that's a tough one. I think it's quite difficult to do, isn't it? I mean, how do you give a score against it? I don't know. Do you? It's I think that's a really tough one, and I think I'd be a little bit nervous about it as well, because the responsible investing, it is all around being responsible. It isn't just about disinvestment, is it? So from an investment manager perspective, it's really easy to disinvest from companies that might not be deemed as green as they could be at this point. But by having that active engagement with them, and L&G will always vote, they'll always engage, and they'll work with companies that are certainly within, say, the oil sort of sector is working with them. The companies that are working on a path to green, a path to net zero, they're needing to generate income to achieve that, and we work alongside them. It has to be. It's impossible to disinvest from everything that's bad, because who buys it? We have to work as a pension industry to work with them to drive that responsible investing path. So I think if you have an overall industry score against, I don't think that necessarily shows the full picture, does it really? I think it's incredibly important to bring to life where the money is invested, what the votes are, which way your investment manager as a member is voting, how they're looking to influence, again through the Tomelo tool, that will bring that to life, whether it's been votes, why LGIM have voted in a certain way, what course of action we're taking with them. So that education piece. So I think it's incredibly important to have a way for all members to access this and to be able to understand it. I think my honest gut feel is that it would be dangerous to go down an industry sort of score or point where, because of that responsible investing point, there's more to it than just putting a score on and disinvesting.
Right, thank you, Stuart. I guess, Jeff, I mean, just flipping that around, I mean, you talked about O2's decision to move to a master trust and take the opportunity to shift the default investment strategy a bit as well. I mean, how easy did you find it to sort of judge between potential providers on these kinds of measures? Would some kind of common measurement have been helpful to you, or actually was it was it more than that?
Well, I think we sort of had to look into it in a bit detail. We took some expert investment advice as well along the way. I think it was clear. I mean, we did a sort of market review 2 years ago, so perhaps the market has moved on since then. But I think for us a key thing was that the default itself had ESG at its core, because I think it's easy to pick a pension and say, over here there's some ESG friendly options, but we know, I know from my schemes that 90% plus people just stick in the default, either because of inertia, like they've never looked at their pension, or because actually they look at it and they actively make a choice to stay there because it's a sensible kind of transition from growth early on into sort of, I guess what we'd say, more investments more ready for retirement when you get close to that period of time, or simply actually the investment information is quite daunting and actually people just like the message, oh, there's a set of trustees who know what they're talking about, have designed the default, I'll just stick in that and bury my head in the sand. I think going back to the sort of previous question, if you did have a sort of single rating for a company today, I think a bit like when you get the energy certificate for your house, it gives you the score today and it gives you the potential. I think the potential score is also really, really important, because actually we could have some big companies today, your oil majors, who on the face of it today are not, very carbon neutral, let's put it that way, but actually they will all have different plans as to how they are going to transition to clean energy, and actually that in itself could be a big differentiator between which of the oil majors actually the likes of LGIM invest in, and why. So I think you would kind of need two scores. I guess the challenge is probably who gives them that score and how, and then what's also that score used for, because actually for a lot of pension members, their funds are invested, or their money, their savings is invested in a fund over which they have no choice of the underlying investments. But maybe you could then say actually that fund is rated as an A, an A or a dark green, that one's a light green, that one's actually an amber. I think it would need some careful thought through and probably some consultation in the industry as to how best it's done and implemented. And equally, I think you would want it consistent across the kind of universe, so that if I'm comparing my L&G pension with my previous employer's pension that sat somewhere else, I've not got two different sets of metrics, because that's just going to confuse everybody, so to speak.
Yeah, that's very good. Thanks, Jeff. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. If there are any other burning questions people want to get in, please get them in quickly now. But I've got a couple more I'm going to pick up. So the next one, Helen, is specifically for you. And it was just, you talked about using sort of topical issues to tailor ESG related messaging to grab people's attention. You talked a lot about timing, both timing kind of in the cycle and timing in the days. Just, I mean, the question is, could you just talk a bit more about your thinking behind that, any other good examples you've got, kind of how you're taking that forward?
I think it's more about, yeah, just, I mean, it is just about sort of watching what's happening sort of generally, yeah, with current affairs, and being able to sort of sample what the sentiment of people are feeling and what messages they're receiving. I mean, I'm trying to think of some examples recently. I mean, we've run, obviously we've just done the environmental sort of votes with COP26. We've run recently the AGM on Nike, and there was quite a few kind of human rights proposals with that one about sort of cotton sourcing in the supply chain. And I guess it's really, I mean, we didn't necessarily have to sort of tag that onto current affairs, but it's really just being able to explain that issue in a way that people understand. And that was taking from the news, explaining that there are certain areas of China that are being watched by the rest of the world for their child labour and sort of anti-slavery sort of policies. So it's really just trying to connect what people are reading outside of their sort of pension sphere into how it's relevant to them, and trying to let them know, you know, your money is actually connected to this in some way and you do have a say.
Yeah. No, that makes loads of sense. And I guess follow up from me, really, I was fascinated by the time of day thing. Is that, I mean, is that presumably is more a test and learn thing? I mean, you're just observing that there are different times of day that work better, and what are you doing with that?
Yeah, we test it, sort of, we're testing it all the time, and sometimes, and it will literally differ on the week. You know, if it's a half-term week that people, you know, there'll be a lot of people off, and leading up to Christmas, that people are going to be accessing their emails and their information and wanting to make those decisions of reading a vote and absorbing it and making an informed decision at different times of the day. So I guess, yeah, we're testing it all the time, and that only varies. That really varies between mobile users and desktop users as well. So we're watching that. And yeah, again, not a huge sort of differences that we're seeing in terms of demographics, but we have seen differences in workplace, and whether people are going to be in their offices receiving this, whether they're going to be out on shop floors or you know, out in the industry. This is all ways that we're trying to catch people at the right time, because what we have realized is that people want to, when they want to act, they want to do it there and then. And that's when you're most likely to engage people. So it's very unlikely that people will read something and come back to it later, as much as we would love them to. It's about there and then, and being able to ignite their kind of emotions and say, right, this is how I'm going to make an impact today. So yeah, it's catching it at the best time.
It's completely fascinating. Loads more to be thought about there, I think. Final question for Joe. Joe, you talked about the need for sort of foundational knowledge building about the fact that pensions are invested and move people on from the savings frame as a sort of precursor to then talking more to them about responsible investment messaging as a sort of foundation for it. But the question is, how does that relate to using responsible investment messages as a mechanism for building basic knowledge? Is that, do the two things have to be distinct, or could there be ways of using the one to drive the other?
No, I think what we saw in the research suggests that you know, we didn't see significant differences between the investment email and the responsible investment emails. However, you know, we saw some of the other differences in terms of trust, and I think everything that Helen has shared about, you know, the kind of stories that you can engage people with, all of that suggests to me that if an objective for communication is to help people understand their money is invested, that a responsible investment story of one kind or another is probably going to be a more emotionally engaging way to do that than just talking about sort of stocks and shares in the abstract. And I do think, you know, I think people are primarily motivated by what do I get out of this, and the sort of basic factors for a pension message are kind of how much money am I going to get when I retire, kind of what do I do if I need to do something to adjust that, and we wouldn't want to get in the way of any of those messages. But if people can feel good about the fact that their money is doing something good in the world, if that builds a kind of positive emotional engagement with the idea of a pension, if knowing that my pension provider is looking after my money responsibly and thinking about the long term, and these kind of stories about sustainable investment strategies help people believe that, you know, I think there is a role for that, and probably that's going to be more powerful than sort of talking about investment in the abstract.
Great, thank you, Jo. And I think we haven't quite got to all the questions, but I think that's a good time to start to wrap up. So if you did ask a question we didn't quite get to it, apologies. I want to say a huge thanks to the panel, to Jo, Helen, Stuart and Jeff. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope the people who joined us have found it useful, both in the handout section of the platform and the chat section. There should now be links both to the full research report and the press release, so please, if you haven't had a chance to engage those yet, please do. And of course, if you want to talk more about any of these topics, do get in touch with us offline. We'd love to pick up with you. But thank you all for attending. Thank you to the panel, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you very much.